Yes, we are online.
Okay, yeah, greetings to everyone. We are here in the second special session on Islamic economics. In the morning, we had one session where Dr. Harun Shenjal and Dr. Abdul Qadir Al-Aloyi presented papers on various aspects of Islamic economics. And in this session, we have three speakers. The first will be Dr. Nurdani Hendrastiti. She's from the University of Indonesia, but at the same time, she's a former PhD student from Durham and currently associated with Durham as well. She will be looking into demand reduction, the materiality, and the growth from the perspective of Islamic economics. And it will be theoretical, supported by some empirical studies. In the second paper, we have Dr. Erhan Akkaş, who is currently visiting academic at Durham University and a PhD from Durham as well. And he will be looking at the rentier state, the political economy of Islamic finance in terms of its association in the emergence in relation to rentier states. And the last paper from another Durhamite, Dr. İsa Yılmaz. He's currently a lecturer at Istanbul Medeniyet University, and he will be looking at this sustainable development goals, again, a philosophical, a theoretical perspective on sustainable development goals in relation to Islamic finance, because it has become the new agenda in Islamic finance circles as well. So we have three Durhamites as well in this session too. I'm sure that it will be enjoyable sessions for those who are still alive and following the session. Nurdani is in Indonesia, so it is already past 1 o'clock, I guess, there, or coming to 2 o'clock. So sorry, Nurdani, for keeping you that long waiting, but it's good to have you all. Even if there is not many audience out there, I'm sure that the video recordings will attract some attention later. Okay, we'll go with Nurdani. The session is yours, or the screen is yours, Nurdani. As in nowadays, that's the term that we use rather than the floor, but the screen is yours.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Prof.
Okay.
Let me share my screen then.
Thank you, Nurdani.
Okay. Yep. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon.
Wherever you are.
Everyone. So, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Nurdani Hendranastiti from Universitas Indonesia. So, I was a PhD student in Durham University under supervision of Prof. Muhammad Asutai. So, this is part of my thesis. It's about demand reduction, demateriality, and degrowth, the responses from Islamic economics and finance. So it's on the environmental issues and how Islamic economics and finance theoretically approach that, and also using the framework of degrowth as the to explain the issues. Okay, so this is the outline. Yeah, it will be there will be some theoretical framework and supported by the empirical part. So the background is that the environmental sustainability has become an emerging issue in the economic and financial sector because there are many institutions start to consider about the effect of any economic activities on the environmental aspects. But we need to understand as well that there is a massive development of manufacturing industry along with the modern consumption culture that has led to the air and water pollution due to the substances being used in the production process, where financial institutions has also been taking part on the industrial activities because they have been providing the financing for those activities. On the other hand, we also understand that the industrial activity and also material consumption are some of requirements for a country to have further economic growth. So there has been a debate between preserving the environment and pursuing economic growth of a country. From the economic and financial sectors, there are several measurements have been taken to balance the effect of the economic growth on environment, such as the establishing the socially responsible investment or SRI, and also the green bond, which green bond is issued intentionally to finance projects related with environment conservation and climate change prevention. Also recently, banks also have considered that climate change may cause the future of financial crisis because of all the adverse impact of the climate change, and it will affect the financing or the projects being financed by the banking sector, which indirectly will affect the banking performance. And consequently, they are trying to work towards reducing the effects of financing projects that can cause further deterioration in the environment. As an alternative, so there is an emergence of Islamic finance, particularly Islamic banking, which the development started with the Mid-Gamar in Egypt in 1972, then followed by other countries, reaching like 1,500 billion US dollar value of total assets at the end of 2017. And however, the development of Islamic financial product itself has been mainly focusing on the ability to provide alternative financing of conventional financial products. So it's more on the giving alternative, and the focus has been on the elimination of riba, minimization of gharar and maisir in the contracts, and what is the source of funds and also how the funds being used. It has not been come upon to deal with environmental issues and sustainability in the future, that is reflected by the Sharia screening criteria that has not touched upon the environmental issues. However, further being criticized for its Islamicity and also put under spotlight for its ability to facilitate the achievement of sustainable development goals, Islamic finance has been progressing on developing green sukuk. That is Islamic bonds that are constructed for financing carbon conscious related projects, in which Indonesia and Malaysia have issued green sukuk started in 2017. In addition to that, Malaysia has also provided SRI Sukuk, a guideline for Sukuk that environment, preservation and protection, energy conservation, promotion of renewable energy, gas emission reduction, and life quality improvement. Then why is it necessary for the Islamic finance to consider about the environmental issues? So the Islamic finance is an accentuation of Islamic moral economy that is constructed through the ontological sources of Islam, which the Islamic ideals aim to establish equilibrium between the interests of all the stakeholders, including the consideration of ecological aspect and the needs to preserve it for the future generations. However, these factors seems to have not been accommodated in the growth concept, in the mainstream growth concept, because the growth concept has been focusing on the material well-being, which put all those ecological aspect and also the consideration for future generation as an external factor. In response to this issue of obsession on linear growth, there is another approach that has been brought to the agenda, namely the degrowth framework. This framework has been formulated by the ecological economists as their concern towards the metabolism of environment that has been disturbed by the economic activities that has been aiming at indefinite growth of GDP. So considering that environmental issues and human well-being should be put at the center of economic activities, it seems that Islamic economics and the growth framework have the same trajectories. In addition, Islamic finance has its ideal aspiration and implementation that seems to be in a contrast. Hence, this paper attempts to answer the following questions: what is the rationale for demand reduction, demateriality, and degrowth in Islamic economics? And also, by taking the carbon emission as a proxy of environmental degradation, what is the relationship between financing delivered by Islamic banks and carbon emission? Okay, so I'll start with the literature review on demateriality and degrowth. So the concept of degrowth is based on the realization that the environment will not be able to accommodate the needs coming from current economic activities. There is a need to pull back and reduce material intensity and further to decrease global consumption and production. To To fulfill this condition, the current concept of positive growth should be shifted towards steady-state economic growth that can be achieved by conducting concept of degrowth. So it's based on that the environment will not be able to accommodate. So with the steady-state economic growth theory and policy, it proposes three important rules. It is not allowed to extract non-renewable resources faster than the rate of renewable substitutes development. The second, it is also not allowed to extract renewable resources faster than the regeneration rate. And the third, it is not allowed to emit waste faster than it can be absorbed by the ecosystem. So we have to consider the ability of the environment um, to provide to absorb
Renew
and also
itself.
to emit from all the economic activities. Then what is the degrowth about, aside from the moving towards like the steady state economic growth? So the term degrowth explains that growth should be inclusive towards every aspect of living being on earth, such as environment, human being, and society. So it's not only the environment, but it should also include the human being and also society, because the current concept of growth is based on the volume of monetary value. It should be reconstructed, and this growth of monetary value does not have to be infinite, so that it can give some space for the other factors like the environment, human being, and society. So the ultimate aim of degrowth is to achieve human well-being, which can be conducted by decreasing social metabolism to a sustainable steady state level under the principles of sufficiency, participatory opposition of class creation, and anti-utilitarianism. So if we put the steps here, like the degrowth from the ultimate means until the ultimate end. So the ultimate end is the human well-being. So the end, the objective is not the growth itself, but it should be the human well-being. And even so, if we take back the intermediate ends, it doesn't consider about growth, but it has to be clear, like it should consist of health, equality, social capital, democracy, low employment, stable prices, no poverty, and decreased working time. And for the intermediate means, it's related with the people, livestock, and build capital. And we have to consider like the most important, the ultimate means, or the first thing that we have to consider is the material use, the energy use, the material outflows, and also the scale. So we have to consider like the resources from the very beginning. And if we put like all the characteristics and the nature of degrowth, so it's based on the book of degrowth. So I put them like I've tried to put them together. So at the very heart is the anti-capitalism. Then it consists of like the sufficiency, participatory, anti-utilitarianism, and opposition of class creation. So with the degrowth proposes that there should be like a participatory in the society. So people should be autonomous. Then within the society, there should be care, commons, and conviviality, and people should consider about sufficiency. So we have to consider about the non-material well-being, and propose of the voluntary simplicity. So since all the material consumption is related with like and the growth proposition is about like having better and having more, so there is a need for the voluntary simplicity, and also to bring the individual and society back, and also the environment. So there is the opposition of class creation, where we should avoid the existence of positional goods, because it will create like a gap between the rich and the poor. And also we have to abolish the debt creation, because it also creates like the owner of the capital and also the one who is in debt. And also proposing the autonomy, because people should have like their own autonomy to develop themselves. And also for the anti-utilitarianism, so people should be more on the care and happiness, because like it should be shared between the society, not only the individual utility. So it has to be in the society part. So this is like the how the degrowth part, and how to realize this degrowth framework. One way to realize the degrowth concept is by dematerialization. Although this concept of dematerialization is said to have a softer tone compared to degrowth, because it is focusing more on the efficiency from the input of production, so that it reduces the environmental impact while it maintains the positive growth. So in the dematerialization part, we still it still concerns about the positive growth, but we can reduce the impact by having like more efficient resources. Um, Although it is considered as the soft tone of degrowth, dematerialization is an important part of essentializing degrowth paradigm, because when it is accentuated as an attempt of changing the consumerism lifestyle that is currently prevailing and being pursued by the global society. And the implication is that dematerialization itself should not only be seen as increasing material efficiency, but it should be continued by increasing, it should not continue to increase the production and consumption. So, because there is a tendency that when we have more efficient material, then we will produce and consume more, because it will, with the same amount of resources, we can produce more or consume more. So it has to be the other way around. So it has to be followed by reducing the production and consumption as well. So it can begin with the material efficiency, then added up with the energy efficiency, material demand reduction, an increase in products durability, and promotion of pro-ecological behavior. So the aim is to reduce the production and consumption, not only having more efficient material resources, but also decreasing the production and consumption. And what is the relationship with the finance? The current financial system is evolving, or is revolved around the capital. So there should be a reconstruction of the current mainstream financial system. Yeah, so it should start from the money and debt creation, because with the debt creation, it creates like a different level of power between the capital owner and also the debtor. So, and it's the ability of creating debt, it starts from the commercial banks, and also there is an existence of interest rate where where lending money will become like going towards fictitious economy. And also because of the existence of interest rate, the consequences is that the positive growth or linear growth of economy has to operate in order to pay back the debt and its interest. So in order to bring back the society and also bring back the economy and finance towards this society, it is necessary to reconstruct the financial system and institutions, and also it can be conducted by community banking, non-debt money, zero interest rate, and establishment of local currency. Like it's to name a few of the proposals in the degrowth framework. Moreover, the financial institutions have to aim the ecological elements into their operational activities, such as investing on cleaner technology. So that's how the finance can is related with the degrowth and demateriality framework. So by reconstructing the financial system and institutions, and also to move towards, to shift towards the investment on the more friendly, more environmental friendly technology and also projects. Now with the literature review on the Islamic moral economy. So Islamic moral economy, as has been mentioned before, it's based on the Islam as its ontological source, and as a worldview, it is based on progression towards the excellence or ahsan by achieving ihsan or beneficence at individual and societal level. So it's not only in the individual but also in the societal level. Um, Therefore, a counter-hegemony Islamic economics, which emerged in post-colonial period as a constructivist development discourse, it's based on the human-centered developmentalism. So it should be revolved around the human well-being, and it's beyond the capital-based economic development. So it has the same trajectories that it aims to decenter the capital. And the main axiom is Tawhid, which Islamic economics essentializes that all the stakeholders' rights must be considered in the economic activities. It means that all the stakeholders are involved and they have the same importance, which by prohibiting the interest or riba, Islamic economics decenters finance in favor of the interest of other stakeholders. So it moves from the focus of capital owner to include all the other stakeholders. And because of the Tauhid axiom, then it essentializes that all the resources are amanah because it all belongs to God, and it should aim at social justice and also equilibrium through the distribution in the society. And with the axiom of Tauhid, so all the stakeholders have the same opportunities to grow and also to develop and progress in line with their fitrah, and there should be no barrier in front of their development. So hence the Islam essentializes extended stakeholding based development as part of Islamic political economy frame and Islamic moral economy substance. So it brings all the stakeholders in the same level to have a progression and development towards their path. Okay, so if we put them
Then
in
I
the
think if you move into your empirical part, time is an
okay.
issue.
Okay, sorry. Thank you. Yeah, so this is the framework. So the ultimate end will be success in the world and hereafter. So there is an addition of hereafter compared to the degrowth framework. So this is the previous empirical studies. It can be direct effect or indirect effect, the relationship between financial development and carbon emissions. So this is all the previous studies results, and for the empirical analysis, it uses data from 20 countries from 192 Islamic banks. The time period is 1998 to 2018. This is the model. So it's the relationship between carbon emission as Y, then the Islamic banks financing X, then the GDP per capita, and also the square of GDP per capita, and also the other control variables. Okay, and this is the rationalization of the mode of financing. So we separate the Islamic banks financing based on its mode of financing and also the sectoral the proportion to sectoral financing. So this is for the mode of financing. We differentiate between the profit loss sharing and also the debt-based instrument. And for the sectoral financing, there are several classifications. So it's the consumer durables, agriculture, manufacture, trade, transportation, real estate, and banking and finance. So this is like the brief result. So apparently the Islamic banks finance have positive relationship with the consumer durables, towards consumer durables have positive relationship with the carbon emission. Then for the and also the fixed based financing instruments in the Islamic banks also have positive relationship with the carbon emission. So we can conclude that Islamic banks have been and and the fixed instruments and also consumer durables have like the highest proportion of Islamic banks. So it seems that the Islamic banks have not been able to accentuate their aspiration, and also it hasn't worked towards the degrowth framework because they give the highest proportion towards sectors that have positive relationship with the carbon emission. So from that result, it seems we can conclude that it hasn't moved towards, it hasn't accentuated the aspiration, and because the implementation and practice of Islamic banks are still on the under the mainstream economic framework to get more profit, and has not been able to all the stakeholders into the financing activities. So I think that's all from me.
Okay, thank you very much, Nurdani. So theoretically, it's the growth theory. Bringing the growth to the debate in Islamic finance is very much successful because it's a growing political economy debate. And unfortunately, in the Muslim world where the Islamic banks are prevailing, the debate has not taken place, at least within the Islamic economics. Therefore, it is important. But at the same time, testing Islamic banks in relation to their carbon emission performance, as you have identified that unfortunately they are working in the same operational principles of the capitalist market economy, and therefore they are producing carbon emission in the same way. However, Islamic moral economy would have suggested that Islamic banks should have considered the interests of other stakeholders, such as environment as well. Thank you for bringing a new dimension to Islamic finance related studies through Islamic moral economy. Okay, and I guess it is time for you to go to bed. It's very late there. Thank you for waiting for your session. I'm really grateful.
Thank you.
The next session will be Erhan. We'll invite Erhan Akkash. He will be looking at the rentier states and the emergence of modern Islamic finance industry. The relationship, of course, has always been discussed that Islamic finance have benefited immensely from the petrodollars and within the GCC, but also expanding Islamic finance in other countries and in other regions. And therefore, Erhan will be looking at that particular dynamic and a political economy perspective again. It's all yours, Erhan. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Prof. Mehmet. And let me share my presentation.
Please. Yep.
Good evening, everyone. And first of all, I thank the organizers for organizing this great and academically rich symposium here in today. And today we'll talk about the role of rentier states in the emergence of Islamic financial institutions. First of all, we will theoretically consider the emergence of institutions. Afterwards, I will touch on the role of oil-rich rentier countries, namely Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, in the emergence of modern Islamic financial institutions, which will lead us to the other discussions. And in this direction, we will discuss some arguments about the rising oil revenues in the 1970s and how this increase in income accelerated the emergence of Islamic financial institutions. And as a content, after presenting the introduction, aims, objectives, and research questions will be presented. After then, theoretical discussion and rentier states will be discussed as a main discussion of the paper. Lastly, general discussion will be presented. And as for introduction, although the story of the region starts with the earliest of the 20th century, Gulf region financially becomes more popular in 1970s when oil income boomed. These years were also that modern Islamic finance industry emerged. Therefore, it is important to discuss the emergence of rentier states and Islamic finance industry together. So, as for aims and objectives, there are two main aims of the paper. The first aim is to explore the theoretical formation of modern Islamic financial institutions by referencing to the ontological source of knowledge. The second aim is to assess the relationship between emergence of rentier states after oil and gas production and the emergence of modern Islamic financial institutions. And as for research question, as we can see also in the pictures, we have oil production in history and now how Islamic financial institutions comes to nowadays. So as a research question, the first question in general is what is the main trajectory of the emergence of modern Islamic financial institutions? And the second question is, what is the link between emergence process of rentier states and modern Islamic financial institutions in the 1970s? As for research significance, the emergence of Islamic economic stems from the actualization of ontological reasoning determined by Quran and Sunnah. And however, Islamic financial institutions do not represent Islamic system as whole, just one part of entire system. Therefore, it can be stated that it is an innovation in the existing system. And in this innovative system, the significance is that the GCC countries are the leading in the modern Islamic financial industry due to their privileges in the global financial system through their extraordinary oil revenues. And as the theoretical discussion, it is possible to state that in our case, there are two theoretical emergence scenarios. It is culture-based and emergent pattern-based. The improving economic values through the knowledge production have changed in the modern economic order, which can be seen in the emergence of institutions in terms of cultural factors and social structure in a society. These factors have led to emerge of new institutions and organizations by using knowledge and social capital within the culture and the social structure of societies. In this type of emergence, values generally based on the moral principles shaping by people's behaviors that reveals in norms. Therefore, values are generally based on the deep elements of the culture. And another type of emergence is based on the emergent pattern. And therefore, we can say the emergence is not a specific thing, for example, like a stone in our pocket. And the second, emergence is not one specific behavior, nor to occur at some moment in time. And neither is emergence a well-defined category like the stones on some particular beach. Therefore, an institution that organically emerge, it has to fulfill the seven dimensions, seven emergent pattern. They are first material realization, the second coherence, third one non-distributivity, the fourth one structure dependency, the fifth one genuine novelty, and the sixth one unpredictability, the last one irreducibility. And as for the emergence of institution in Islam, is the last discussion in the theoretical part. It based on the Quran and Sunnah within the Tawhid understanding. They create the Islamic normative principles which lead to determine the everyday practices and social capital in Islam. After all, intersection of knowledge in Islam leads to emerge organic Islamic institutions. However, rather than following this path, the modern Islamic financial institutions Islamize the existing financial institutions by mimicking them and through the Islamization of knowledge. Therefore, as discussed so far, these institutions are not organic institutions, but institutional innovation from the ontology-based emergence perspective.
Erhan, sorry to interrupt, but I think your slide remained same on the theoretical discussion, the first one. It hasn't moved.
There's only this one. I didn't.
Okay. Sorry, my apologies.
Yeah,
Thank
sorry.
you. Sorry.
According to emergent pattern perspective, there are 7 dimensions to determine an institution as organic or innovation. When we look at the Islamic financial institutions, first pattern is material realization. It is Islamic banks and financial institutions. They have physical process and structure. So the Islamic financial institutions fulfill this emergent pattern. But when we look at the second one, it is coherence. The Islamic financial institutions do not present Islamic system as whole. So it doesn't fulfill the second one. When we look at the third one, for example, non-distributivity, Islamic banks share same system, so it doesn't fulfill as well. And when we look at the fourth one, the structure dependence, systemic properties depends on the connective structure, reflect on fiqhi part, not the other parts. And the fifth one, genuine novelty, it is not organic novelty, only mirroring the existing system, so it doesn't fulfill as well. When we look at unpredictability, there is some certain practices exist in Islamic banking. So we can guess the return like rebate system and PLS also predictable. And in the last one, irreducibility, Islamic system cannot be reduced to the Islamic banking. So at the end, Islamic financial institutions fulfill the only material realization pattern. So therefore, we cannot call Islamic financial institutions as organic, but we can call it is institutional innovation. So Islamic banks and financial institutions just only fulfill the first pattern in this emergent pattern process. So from this perspective, also we can call it is institutional innovation rather than organic institution. So far we discussed the theoretical emergence of institutions. Now we will discuss the emergence of these institutions in the practice. Also, it will be historical perspective. So the financial system has been in a structural and ideological transformation process since the early 1970s. In this transformation, some states take a more active role in the global financial system. In this direction, the rise of Islamic finance started in the 1970s with the oil revenues that triggered the structural and ideological transformation in the financial system of Gulf countries. As of 2019, the GCC countries account for approximately 42% of Islamic finance asset. In this case, the GCC countries have the largest share of Islamic finance asset regionally compared to other countries. So when we look at the history, with the British military withdrawal from the region at the end of the 1960s, the Arab countries of the Gulf and oil production with the help of foreign companies, they should have transferred these oil revenues to the global financial system. Therefore, Gulf capital could easily be transferred to global financial system through Islamic finance. When we look at the Gulf share in the total asset, it can be seen that they have the biggest asset in nowadays. And the first established banks, it is Dubai Islamic Bank, I guess, are largely from the Gulf region. There is no coincidence that this emergence is in line with the acceleration of oil production and the increase in income in the Gulf region. So the gap between local norms and global financial practices was problem for free capital flows by preventing global financial markets from assessing a segment of capital, Gulf capital and Gulf citizens from receiving the benefits from global investment. There was one solution, that was the establishment of new type of modern financial institutions in the 1970s. It was the modern Islamic financial institutions. It is Islamic Bank, we can say. So in such a process, would it be easy to establish an organic system or just to mimic the existing system? As a result, Islamic finance was responsible for a serious financial deepening, which brought the traditional people to the financial markets as a substitute for interest-based banking. So these banks were generally controlled by ruling families, and they were able to transfer their expanding capital into the global system without compromising their tradition and belief, thanks to their oil revenues. Therefore, these countries found a new space to canalize their capital into global financial system. And in here we have graph. As seen in the graph, their GDP was around 1.6 trillion US dollar in 2019, and their GDP sharply has increased since early 2000s. Total Islamic finance asset in 2019 was also 2 trillion US dollar. Islamic finance industry has also similar trend to Gulf region's GDP since early 2000s, and as the GCC countries account for approximately 42% of Islamic finance assets. As for conclusion, modern Islamic, I call it modern Islamic financial institutions, they are emergent patterns, so that institutional innovation rather than organic emergence of institutions shaped through gradual manner through their own ontology and epistemology. And the rentier states lead to increased Islamic finance demand due to oil income boom. And rentier states are able to channel their expanding capital through their oil revenues into the global financial system without compromising their tradition and belief, thanks to modern Islamic financial institutions. And I want to conclude my presentation with a statement by Bordo. To change the world.
Your slide is not full, Aaron. Yep.
Is it okay now?
Yeah, yes, you missed that. Yep, that's fine.
Yeah, okay. To change the world, one has to change the ways of the world making. That is, the vision of the world and practical operations by which groups are produced and reproduced. I think this statement can fit my presentation. And thank you very much for listening. It's the end of my presentation. Thank you, Prof. Mehmet.
Okay, thank you very much, Erhan, and particularly bringing another theoretical frame to Islamic finance emergence. That's the emergence methodological framework. It has been very much useful to understand how Islamic finance emerged and the nature of emergence. As Erhan concluded, what we have, rather than an authentic emergence, we have emergent pattern or institutional innovation, because the content and their substance, Islamic banks' substance, very much the institutional logic of the capitalist system. And hence, thank you for bringing to our attention the emergence related theoretical frame and subjecting Islamic finance to that particular framework. Very much appreciated. The last paper here in this session and the Islamic Economics Special Session 2 is Isa Yilmaz. Dr. Yilmaz will be looking into critical perspectives on sustainable development goals. In particular, of course, Islamic, when we look at the debate around Islamic banks and financial institutions, unfortunately, the entire shift, it seems to shifting towards sustainable development goals. Even Islamic Development Bank, for that matter, has entirely reframed itself around sustainable development goals. However, whether it's a patchwork again, trying to moderate the consequences of capitalism, or it's a real moral questioning of the existing system to make a difference. In other words, whether it can make a difference in terms of questioning the initial equation or the first equation. It's all yours, Issa. Thank you for staying around.
Thank you, Prof. Mehmet. Good evening, everyone. Just let me prepare for the presentation. Now, sorry. Just a second. Okay. Okay, thank you, Professor, again. I know it's a very late time in Turkey right now, and therefore I'll do my best to finish this presentation within 25 minutes. So it's a very good opportunity and pleasure for me to present my study here in the symposium. Therefore, thanks for organizing this event. Today my presentation will be on bringing some critical perspectives on economic development understanding within Islamic finance industry. And in particular, there are some questions that I want to raise. The first the question is that I asked the question that what kind of development Islam envisages first. This is the first question, and to what extent sustainable development goals can fit into Islamic principles. So let's start with a very basic but very important question. Why today does every economy put development at the center of their economic policies? There can be some responses to this question, but one reason can be about the fact that the development became a very, very universal objective without any doubt. The established development understanding today is seen as the only way to grow, prosper, and welfare. Therefore, any kind of social and economic problem, including education, health, environment, and the others, those of them needs to be addressed by development policies. There is no question on this statement. It's also important to state that perhaps this is the critical but not easily seen aspect of development, that the development is presented as the single way with no alternative ways to develop. Hence, development today is like a never-ending race on the same path, and it ignores the different capacities of economies. If you look at more closely to the recent history, for instance, we see how this single path of development sustained through the policies of World Bank, UNDP, IMF, and recently Millennium Development Goals and Sustainable Development Goals recently. So what I want to point is that we all race to fulfill global development objectives, but somewhat we forgot what we are racing for, or at the expense of what we are developing our economies. And lastly, I can say that whether this achievements is what we desire Islamically. These are the main questions that I want to raise during this presentation. So the worst scenario is that, would it be the case that new forms of colonialism shows up under the guise of development in the post-war era? As the concept looks very smart, because the development concept, not just smart, but also convincing and desiring as compared to the bad experiences with classical colonialism. So development debate has been made in the Muslim world for ages, maybe, especially for the last 3 ages, and now it never ends. It continues to still debated. We see that if we conceive development as technological advancement and life-easing process, no one will have objections on developments. But if we consider development as an ideology, in other words, what we call it as developmentalism, we have enough reason to criticize. Let's first clarify what I refer with developmentalism. Developmentalism refers that the advancement of society is inevitable and progress is the ultimate objective that a society must follow. So this ideology lies on the Western worldview, Enlightenment process or period, and also positivism. But I will suffice just mentioning these. If you look at for instance, here in the presentation, President Truman's speech in 1949, he states that just after the Second World War, he states that we must embark on a bold new program for making the benefits of our scientific advances and industrial progress available for the improvement and growth of underdeveloped areas. So the old imperialism, exploitation for foreign profit, has no place in our plans. What we envisage is a program of development based on the concepts of democratic fair dealing in order to help them realize their aspirations for a better life. This is the speech made in 1949 by the US President, ex-President Harry Truman. So what we see here in this speech, in this passage, we see that just after the speech, almost 2 billion people found themselves as underdeveloped category. So this is a new categorization. This is a new way of categorization that has been made to reorder the world order, reorganize the world order. So if I summarize what I explained so far, I must say that developmentalism is backed by Western progressive ideology. This is the fact. So it's mainly Eurocentric, also universalist, and also market-oriented understanding, which was built upon Western industrialization experience. And also it ignores cultural and historical contexts and subjectivities of non-Western societies. This is the core problem that today developmentalism faces and also critically approached. And it's also a verbal cover for the same old development practices. Here you see the Sustainable Development Goals, 17 goals that is mostly known. And under these goals, there are other targets, specific targets, which I will just mention how many numbers of targets they have. So before moving to the Islamic response to the mainstream developments, now it will be good to talk just a bit about the nature of the SDGs, and in other words, Sustainable Development Goals. So it has 17 goals, as I mentioned, and also 169 targets and also 232 indicators. The aim with Sustainable Development Goals is about bringing together economic, environmental, and social concerns, including ending poverty, gender inequality, dealing with climate change, and ensure food security. These are the basic aims that Sustainable Development Goals want to achieve. So Sustainable Development Goals are presented as the agenda for people, not just people, but also planet and prosperity. What they aim to strengthen universal peace and human freedoms. With the slogan they have, the slogan is "Leaving no one behind." So the SDGs was introduced after the MDGs, Millennium Development Goals, that were adopted for the period 2000 and 2015. So we now in the age of Sustainable Development Goals, and there is a projection developed by the UNDP, United Nations Development Program, for 2030. They have another objectives to fulfill under the Sustainable Development Goals. So when I come to the response of the Muslim societies against this development in the form of SDGs as universal ideology, the question is whether we must stand against developmentalism because of its problems that I mentioned earlier, and content ourselves with just opposition without producing no alternative. Of course not. We should develop some alternatives. We should bring or introduce some alternatives to the existing Sustainable Development Goals. So if we look at the Muslim history, I made a categorization, possible responses against the ideology of development. There are three kind of responses that I developed, that I noticed in another way. The first one is about the total rejection without producing alternative. And if you look at the details of this categorization, we see that this is a very, very marginal view. It links the observed underdevelopments within the Muslim world with being Muslim. So the claim is that as we Muslim, we were already informed that in the Quran, we were already informed that we will be tested against poverty, oppression, because we are Muslims, etc. So this is more or less fatalistic perspective. Let's look at the second response. The second response is about supporting development and staying away from ideological debates. This is, I guess, the majority opinion. That's my opinion, that this constitutes the majority opinion. So the advocates of this view argue that development is a positive concept, and hence it definitely leads us to prosperity and welfare. And under this category, there are two different views, I think. The first view is that if we mean by development a technical progress, by talking about development as a technical progress, then yes, we must adopt it. However, once moral consequences of development are taken into account, we should avoid morally defective aspects of this development project. So the second view under the same category states that neither technically nor morally there is no problem with development. And they claim that, look at the Muslim world today now, and in particular, look at the illegal immigrants who are running away from the war in the Middle East, in the Islamic world, and they migrate not to the East, but West, because of high development, not observed in the Muslim world, but in the Western world. This is the claim, this is the argument made by the second view, upon supporters of the second view. So let's come to the third category. In this category, this view suggests that the total rejection of mainstream development and the struggle to provide alternative discourse beyond Western paradigm. So this view is weakly voiced amongst academics, I guess, but it's very strong in producing counter argument. And this view acknowledges the underdevelopment of Muslim world. Yeah, that's the case. But it seeks to overcome this backwardness by not following the same path with Western countries, but looks for the ways for harmonious developments. So while the third view deserves further elaboration, such as how Islam perceives developments different from the established understanding, the presentation just focuses on the majority opinion, which has no serious concern with ideological debates. So in the Islamic finance, for instance, this is quite evident. There is almost an agreement on the SDGs as the perfect benchmark for Islamic financial objectives. Also, many claims that Islam already contains these principles, but Western academics discovered this. If we look at, for instance, the ISDB group, Islamic Development Bank Group's approach, we easily see that they fully commit to the 2030 agenda of United Nations Development Program. So on the other hand, there is still some, but very local initiatives on questioning Western development ideology, such as Malaysia's value-based intermediation, VBI, which raises fundamental questions like the consequences of existing development paradigm, like on profit maximization behavior, shareholder value orientation, inequality gap, etc. So if we accept Malaysia's experience with the VBI as a local experience, and it's just an exception, we see that almost all countries are now competing each other to fulfill the requirements with sustainable development goals. However, the supporters of the SDGs, one way or another, should respond to some criticisms directed towards SDGs. And I'll now briefly state some of the critiques here. But before that, I should state that most of the critiques against SDGs are heavily influenced by Foucault's concepts such as culture, discourse, disciplinary power, knowledge, and also the truth of science. After stating this, after reminding this, let's look at some critiques. First, SDGs has significant limits in terms of understanding the cultural and political specificity of local contexts. This is a very, very important question that needs to be addressed by the supporters of the SDGs paradigm. So the second one, we know that when a development agency defines an area as underdeveloped, marginal, or poor, let's say backward, and they support this view by using statistics and other abstractions, and then works to develop this area. They aim to develop this area. This process necessarily increases the power of the bureaucracy. So, which is not good for the society and economy, as we all experienced during the last century. The increase in the power of bureaucracy does not solve the many questions related to the society and economy in particular. The third criticism is that development is criticized because of its character having a top-down and also ethnocentric and also technocratic approach. To understand this, we see that the end destination is to achieve the same level of income, education, and health statistics and political institutions of the West. It is never the other way around. So the critics can be further listed, but I think it's enough to state just these 3-4 arguments or critiques against SDGs. I'll stop here after giving one more example, just one more example. For capitalism, sustainability is taken to mean sustained growth. In other words, economic growth cannot be avoided under the capitalist system because there is no profit to be made in a stagnant economy. The need for economic growth in the capitalist system should be beyond dispute. So, well, if we summarize the development ideology with one sentence, it is all possibilities were opened to the human subject, author of his own development, emancipated from the divine design. With this sentence, we can summarize the development ideology, I believe. The question, after reading this statement, the question is, should we support such a proposition? If we develop some criticism to this view, first, we may claim that Islam determines a limit to the potentialities. As Rububi axiom infers, just remember from the Nurdani's presentation, the axioms, Islamic axioms, one of them was Rububiyya. As Rububiyya axiom infers, God is the sole author of development of the universe, and Muslims as the Khalifa role can only pursue development within divine design. So while the ideology of development aims human emancipation and self-mastery, Islam promises emancipation and empowerment by surrendering and consent with the divine design. This requires the consciousness about the ontological position of human. Before I end my presentation, I should leave 2 main questions here to further discuss, maybe in the Q&A session here or later. The first one, whether an alternative economic or financial development is possible in Islamic finance. if I give a quick answer to this, we can say that yes, but with of course some caveats. This alternative development shouldn't be necessarily compared with the success criteria of Western development. What are these success criteria? It includes efficiency, for instance, or maximization or low cost. Second question that I want to raise is, what are the distinguishing factors that Islamic development must have? This is a very broad question, but just to state some of the important points here, let me here discuss about this. The first one, it should be, the Islamic development should be human-centered. Second, it must hold stakeholder understanding, which interpreted as everything in the universe has a stake, including human, environment, society, animals, family, plants, etc. Third, it must reveal harmonious developments. And fourth, not only material development is aimed, but also spiritual and moral development must be generated. Similarly, not only transactional development, but also transformational development must be achieved. And lastly, not instrumentally moral solutions, but rather substantively moral solutions should be followed. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you for your patience. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Issa, for your take-up on the developmentalist discourse. It is very much important, in particular, when we see the SDGs-related debate becoming a hegemonic new debate for Islamic finance. As you highlighted, even the leading institution, Islamic Development Bank, has chosen its new path within the sustainable development. However, the initial promise was very much the development of an authentic Islamic outlook, an Islamic theory of development that has not come to fruit, unfortunately. Again, that's perhaps on the one hand is a global domination on development discourse. And on the other hand, the difficulties in raising counter-hegemonic positioning, because the hegemony is so strong, it does not allow any other form of counter-hegemony to survive, as we have seen in Islamic banking, how Islamic banks have become the instrument of the existing capitalist framework. Thank you for bringing that to debate and identifying the particular take-up on the development issues and what could be the potential Islamic development, if any, of course, Islamic development perspective on that. Appreciate all your contributions. I can see that colleagues for the next session have moved in, so we have to open the space for them. But I'm grateful for your contribution. Nurdani has already, I think, past 2 o'clock in Indonesia. So thank you again, and hopefully we'll meet in other sessions and platform. But I'm grateful for your contribution, and tomorrow we'll continue with the third session on the special session on Islamic economics. Thank you again, and good night, and take care.